Just $379.
With my VCR from Zeller's, I recorded the movie, and he didn't have to stay up.
What time is it?
Is he a zealot?
Good night, dear.
I said I'd stay up.
Zellers. Only you'll know how little you paid.
We're coming through for you.
Good morning. Remember General Al Haig, who was going to take over the White House when Reagan was shot? He was in town last night. Very tough on nuclear weapons. Very tough on the balance between East and West. But very delicate on giving an American right-wing opinion on the election of our new shining knight, Brian Mulroney. Here's what Haig said.
Now, I said to a small group of locals here a few moments ago upstairs that I'm not entitled to comment on your recent campaign here in Canada. And I won't do so. I'll just smile broadly.
But my targets are broader and faced at education this morning. Will the people here smile broadly at the prospect of a new Conservative government held or guided by the previously appearing right-wing Mulroney, who now seems to be quite a pinkish Tory for the moment? And I have here this morning Professor Granatstein from the East, who with two colleagues has written a book called The Great Brain Robbery, Canada's Universities on the Road to Ruin. And I just love the book. It is an extravagant book. For instance, it says, my interpretation, universities should be for the richest and the brightest. Tenure is a scandal of featherbedding and patronage. Sabbaticals are mostly stealing money by these layabout professors. There should not be open accessibility to our universities, and all in all, the universities in Canada, it would seem from this book by Granatstein and Company, are an unmitigated disaster. But here as referees, here of course is professor or doctor?
Either one.
10 a penny anyway, these doctorates. Here is Dr. Professor Granatstein, and here to monitor him and to put him in his place are our two most distinguished educators in the province of British Columbia. Dr. George Pedersen of the University of British Columbia, and Dr. Bill Saywell of my own alma mater, Simon Fraser University. Now, having dealt with this dreadful subject this morning, I was pressured into it, of course, by my own academic desires and standards. Apart from that, we're going to talk to the usual tale of woe and misery from Pat Clarke, the president of the BC Teachers Federation, but they do seem to have one good, strong story about the wrong and misguided actions of West Vancouver School Board with Maureen Ciarniello. First, though, however, Granatstein, the man who's going to dump on our universities after the break. Dr. Granatstein is a professor of history at York University in Toronto, and to drop my opening hyperbole, I think I can say quite fairly that the book of you and your colleagues Bercuson and Bothwell is a fairly brutal attack on the funding of universities and the university system, which you say quite clearly has plunged them into undergraduate institutions of substandard quality with far too many people there who shouldn't be there and far too many layabout, tenured, feather-bedding, lazy, careless professors. Is that a fair summary?
Without the adjectives, yes.
Well, take the adjectives out, it wouldn't make much difference, would it?
I think in general I agree with the summary.
You'd go for substandard.
Yes.
You'd go for waste of federal monies.
And provincial.
And you'd go for far too cheap a cost for the individual student.
Yes.
And you'd go for tenure as a scandal.
Parts of tenure.
Sabbaticals are dreadful.
For many people.
Make a case, because we've got two university presidents sitting here listening to you, who are very concerned about seriously concerned about the fiddling of money by provincial governments from the federal grants and the incredible upsurge which is coming in fees for students. Make your case, Doctor.
Well, let's talk about sabbaticals first. That's one subject that I have strong views on, and we express them in the book. In Ontario, the usual practice is that a faculty member is entitled to a sabbatical every 7th year. Ordinarily, you get from 75 to 85% of your salary paid. In my university and in most universities in Ontario, there is no requirement that you report fully on what you did or did not do during that year. In effect, it's a subsidized holiday for most people. Now, I think sabbaticals are very important. For the researching scholars, a sabbatical is the only way you can tackle a really important project in with the time to do it properly. And I think they're absolutely vital for those people. But I think it's a scandal that everyone gets a sabbatical, whether they use it productively or not. There's an area that should be cleaned up.
That would save millions, I presume?
It would save some money, yes.
All right, briefly on tenure.
Tenure is originally in this country to protect academic freedom. I think professors, like journalists, should have their right to speak freely protected. But tenure has been transformed over the last 15 years in this country into job security, something it was never intended to do. And job security is not something that people should get at the age of roughly 28 or 29 and then never ever be tested again in a university system. Why should someone who may have been doing research and teaching well when he was 28 at the age of 45, after not having done any of it for 17 or 18 years, continue to be employed? I don't think that's rational.
You may find from our university presidents here, however, that they are now on an ability to pay dictum laid down by the provincial government, and that ability to pay has or will effectively kill the lifetime automatic tenure.
Yeah, I know roughly what's happening in BC. I wouldn't for a minute claim to be an expert on the BC situation, but that seems to me to be the wrong way to tackle this kind of problem. What the BC government is doing is using a meat axe on a university, and they're going to kill the good people and probably not kill the bad ones. I think that's the wrong way to go about it.
All right, let's get to the academic question quite seriously. The real damage in the frenzy of changing things for the sake of meeting student demands, universities, not just yours, which I presume is guilty, across Canada altered admission and curriculum requirements, watered down or eliminated core requirements, a steady inflation of grades, produced the damaging concept that students were entitled to the same treatment, the same privilege, and the same right to determine the course of university government as professors, a dangerous erosion of the quality and value of education students are receiving at Canadian universities, and the granting of degrees to people who should not hold them. Now, you don't even make a qualification there. How many of Canada's universities does this apply to?
I think it applies to virtually them all. I don't think there's a single first-class university left in Canada.
Not one?
Not one. We're in the situation now where many
UBC is second class.
UBC is second class, so is University of Toronto.
Where is SFU?
It's the same place my university is, second and a half class.
Second and a half class?
Yeah.
My God almighty. Now, what about the cost of university education? Why don't we just close them down and start again?
Well, you can't. You simply can't do that. The costs are enormous. The costs have to be enormous. I think we could find some ways of putting a little more money into the system by charging higher tuition fees. But
that's what I said, only for the richest.
Well, wait a minute now. I was just about to qualify. I don't want it to be only for the richest. It would be a scandal in this country if it was, because as it is
or
now...
even if it were.
That too. It's that honorary degree from Simon Fraser.
I apologize. It would be a scandal if it were. Carry on.
Thank you.
Only for the richest.
I wish I knew where I was. What we have to do is have a system that lets the brightest attend. I want to see a meritocracy, not an aristocracy. Let's have a system that helps the bright working class kid get to university. He doesn't get there now. Let's find some way that he can go and have his tuition paid.
How do we know if we've got a bright working class system if our high school system education is no better than the university?
Well, I think you're right there, and I think we have a terrific problem picking them out. I was on a Board of Education committee in Toronto on the education of gifted children, and I was stunned to discover that there were no gifted children in the working class areas, according to what they told us. And in part because the teachers couldn't be bothered to find them, in part because they were so absorbed trying to cope with the basic education of the uneducable, and they couldn't pick them out. But they're there. There's no reason why the Portuguese or the Italians or the Chinese or the Ukrainians shouldn't have as many bright people in proportion as the
Well,
Anglo-Saxons.
it's coming down to the old economic squeeze. What you're envisaging, said he, you're going right back to the cream of the crop. And you can take my own country of Scotland, whereby if you had money, there was odd bursaries and merit, but if you had money, you went to university, and if you didn't have money, you didn't go to university. And we can't go back to that.
Don't want to go back to that. I want to go back to a system that we get the cream of the crop when it means the brightest, not just the richest.
All right, now funding. Well, first of all, aren't you part of the problem yourself?
Probably.
How much are unions to blame? University unions and faculty associations to blame for this greedy grabbing at power and security.
They have a good deal of the blame.
And you're part of that problem.
Yes.
You unionized the university or a department.
The university. I was the president of the faculty association at York University when we unionized.
Are you still?
Am I still the president? No.
Are you still in the faculty association?
Yes.
Have you changed your mind about the need for unionization?
Yes.
What made you change it?
Well, when I helped unionize York University, I thought we could develop a system that would protect the very best faculty at the same time as it helped the ones who needed protection. It turned out over 7 or 8 years that in fact there were many more of the people who needed protection than there were of the very best faculty, and the majority imposed its own standards on the trade union. In effect, at my university, there's no longer any merit pay, which means that everybody gets the same raises, the same small raises, I might say. And that seems to me to be something that does not reward quality, that penalizes quality.
All right, now, I'm going to bring the presidents in soon, but first of all, are the standards of education taught by the professors are as poor as the students who come in from the high school?
Many professors have very high standards. The students in general have, I think there's been some improvement in the last couple of years in Ontario, but there's still a long way to go. I think the standards have to rise in the universities.
How much is there in wasted curriculum items in the universities?
There's a fair amount. I think it'd be much better if there was a good hard core that everybody had to go through in their first 2 years.
What about Canadian studies? I can remember the panic and the demand for Canadian studies, Canadian studies, Canadian studies.
Canadian studies is a fraud and a scandal. There's too much federal money going down the pipe in a lot of quasi-academic ways. I'm in favor of the study of Canada. I'm a Canadian historian. I want to study Canada. But Canadian studies is simply a fraud.
Well, isn't Canadian studies the study of Canada?
No, it's a quasi-discipline with its own journals, its own grants, its own whole system that's entirely separate. And I think it's a scandal.
What you've written in the Great Brain Robbery is very easy reading, but it sounds to me like a hurriedly dashed off pamphlet from the old days.
Well, it's a political pamphlet, there's no doubt.
Oh, where are your politics, therefore? What are you?
I voted NDP in the last election.
So you're not a unionist anymore, but you're an NDP, and what are your predictions of the way university funding will be handled by the Conservative governments which now totally rule this country?
I would suspect that there won't be any enormous change in the way they handle it over the way the Liberals have handled it.
Well, let's see how you handle the university presidents. We're going to bring on Messrs. Pedersen and Saywell, and I'll stay right out of the fight after the break. It was time for me, early in the season, to have Drs. Pedersen and Saywell on the program about their continuing problem of university funding. And it seemed an ideal morning this morning for them to appear with Dr. Granatstein so that they can disabuse us that if you get more money, or that if Mulroney does anything, things will be any better. Dr. Pedersen.
I guess, what's the question?
The question is, what do you think? Well, I would expect you to respond just to a simple statement in a minor debate.
I should observe you look fantastic after your annual sabbatical, by the way.
And furthermore, paid. But not paid
full
out,
pay,
not
too.
paid out of the taxpayers' money.
Right.
And if I don't perform, I can be slaughtered at a moment's notice.
Yes, I'm sure.
And I have no grounds for appeal except in the courts right now. What about Mulroney's election? Is it going to make any difference to university funding in British Columbia, or do you predict that you're going to be in as tough a bind as you are now?
I suspect we're going to be in as tough a bind. I agree with Jack. I think that there's going to be a limited improvement. What I would hope might improve, however, has to do with the extent to which there's better understanding between the two levels of government. We've had some fairly serious difficulties in this country in terms of our federalist system with respect to funding, and there is a new agreement that has to be reached in 1985 And I would hope the new government would have an opportunity now to create a different climate, and that there might be some greater understanding about what the needs look like, and a recognition that the federal government has a role to play in education as well as the
both
provinces.
of you gentlemen have suffered quite heavily from budgets being slashed and faculty positions being eliminated. Is that not correct?
That's right.
What have you done at SFU in the way of having to trim your sails to meet the shortage of money?
Well, we've lost about 91 positions over the last 2 or 3 years. We've laid off people earlier. This current year, when we had a -5 situation, I got the Faculty Association to agree to a salary cut. It's the first time, I think, in the history of this country since the Depression that's happened. I was insistent on a point, and I was pleased that they agreed, the faculty agreed, a point that Jack made earlier on merit. I said, I do not want to get rid of merit. I want to be able to reward the very best people. Let's bring down the salary base by a salary reduction. And my faculty agreed, and I'm awfully proud of them for
So
doing
you
it.
and Granatstein have no quarrel on merit whatsoever? Did you have merit prior to this?
There was merit prior to it. Many other universities, when they get in a position where they can't pay the salaries they wish, just freeze or they bring them all down. I said, no, bring down the base, but in fact increase the span of the merit so that you can go to the very best and give him some kind of, or her, some kind of reward. And that's what we've done, and I'm very proud of it.
Before we bring Jack in again, I'd like to pursue that with you, Dr. Pedersen. You had problems with merit in your previous contracts, did you not?
No, not that I'm aware of. You should recognize, Jack, that at UBC there has been no salary increase of any kind
For
the
2
past
years.
2 years.
Second year in a
Absolutely zero.
row, you've
That's
frozen
right.
it, right.
And, but there's always been provision for merit pay at UBC, as I understand it. Now, keep in mind, I've only been there 1 year. But my understanding that has been granted, and there has been differentiation.
And how many positions have you slashed? Teaching, I'm talking about faculty people.
Well, there would be 77 faculty positions that were dropped as of April 1st last
How many of them had tenure?
Well, we did not terminate anyone who involuntarily who had tenure. What we did was go with people who were taking retirement, resignations, and we also bought out a number of people who were near the end of their career.
See, he doesn't want to tackle tenure, does he?
Well, it's very hard to tackle tenure. It's really tough. You get into the courts very fast.
No, you have to recognize we will all be tackling tenure this year if we get 0 increases or negative numbers again.
Well, now, we're going to come to him and quality in a moment, but financially, are you faced with further cuts on 0 increases this year if you get them?
The expectation we're having at the present time, we're modeling on everything from a -5 up to a small increase. And the readings we're getting from government people is that we will be very fortunate to get a flat budget.
You too?
Well, I hope that we will, as a system, get equity amongst the 3 universities. I'm sure we will.
You mean they're treated in a much more favorable way than you are?
No, I think we're treated basically quite fairly.
You're trying hard to promote a fight today, aren't you?
Well, I mean, it brings out the truth from people if you can get them annoyed at each other, as you well know.
But I think on the funding question, Jack, that I'm a little more optimistic than George is. I've seen public attitude turn around in this province. I've seen us get good press, even from people like you from time to time.
I always give you good press.
Mulroney is on record as saying that there has to be a national educational policy. He's on record as saying that national funds, federal funds to the provinces that are earmarked for education must go to education. The fact that he's going to attempt to create a new kind of spirit of federalism between the provinces at least is a move in the right direction. I'm a little more positive.
My university presidents will correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that in British Columbia the money given by Ottawa to the provincial government is siphoned into other causes and doesn't go to the universities in total, at least.
I think that happens in
Is that the
Ontario,
same?
too. I think that happens in Ontario, too.
But is it not a direct intervention in education of the federal government to give the money directly to you to spend in
Well,
education?
That's right. There was a time, Jack, when it was done directly, and I guess primarily because of Duplessis, but probably other provinces as well. That practice was stopped, and now the funding goes directly to provincial treasuries.
Well, gentlemen, and you may come in, please. What do you say to the very slashing attacks on the quality of your students, the unnecessary degrees? You've dealt with tenure and feather bedding, of which I think you're in agreed that they can be handled, can't they?
I think that, no, I think there are some very legitimate concerns. I think some of the points that are brought out in that book are very good ones. I agree that there have been a number of aspects of university operation where the administration has not been handled in the past as well as it should, and those inadequacies should be corrected.
But you're making a broader point, aren't you? You're making the point that the quality of incoming students and outgrowing degrees has dropped dramatically in the past 20 years.
I don't blame my colleagues or me for the quality of the incoming students. That's somebody else's problem. We have to deal with it. Where we deserve, I think...
Oh, yeah, you train the teachers.
Not anymore. Not very much anymore. We haven't trained teachers in a big way for a long time. But what we take the blame for, I think, is that our standards have slipped. At my university, we call it upward slippage in the grades. It means that, you know, last year's B is this year's A.
You mean for the students? Last year's B is this year's A.
That's right.
Upward slippage.
Upward slippage.
And this is done by sloppy professors.
It's done by general decline in standards.
Upward slippage, gentlemen. General decline in standards.
I think first of all, let me give a general attitude to that book. I think it speaks well of the academic community, and I wish other professions were equally as self-critical, that an academic who has been a major figure in a faculty association can publicly look at ourselves collectively in this way. I don't agree with everything, particularly on the essential issue of tenure. I mean, we might get to that later, but I think that's a very positive book. We are going to, if we improve the universities, we're going to do it by ourselves, by the kind of collective peer pressure amongst ourselves to be better, rather than public pressure on us. And in that sense, I think the book's very positive. The basic problem in my mind, and it's particularly an Ontario-based book in many ways, is formula funding. If governments are going to pay us per student, and in BC we don't have that, George, but I gather our current situation is based on a historical formula funding, then the pressure is to lower standards and bring in students so that you've got the grant to work with.
I mean, to pack the classes.
Sure.
The question of how many young people should go to university is a social priority public policy question. Let the government wrestle, let the public wrestle with that issue, but do not fund the universities on the basis of that, in the sense that whatever level of funding we get, we have to ensure quality at that. Don't take money away if students go away, or give it if students come.
There's no absolute in those numbers at all. Obviously, there are countries in the world that have a much higher participation rate and a very, very high quality educational system. Japan would be a very good example of that. I don't happen to agree that we have too many students coming into our universities. This province, for example, we, with the exception of Prince Edward Island, have the lowest participation rate in post-secondary education of any place in Canada. It's only running around 9–10%. I don't happen to think that's an overinflated number at all.
When you say post-secondary, do you mean all the technical institutes?
No, I'm sorry, university education.
University education.
Right, and I don't happen to think that's an overinflated number at all.
Some people might want to raise the question, because the phones are working today, that maybe there's too much academic intellectual education. We've got all kinds of people who can't find jobs because they don't have the technical skills. And we'll take some phones too after the break. 2 points I want to make. Professor Granatstein says very clearly no fee should be less than $2,000 from the student, right?
Yes.
That's what you said.
Yep.
Minimum of $2,000 in today's market.
Yep.
How much do you charge?
Oh, we're up well over around 1,200 now, I guess, on an academic year equivalent.
What would happen if you put fees up to $2,000 in British Columbia tomorrow?
Well, you'd have a tremendous amount of concern, obviously, not only because of the increase, but also because we have gone in British Columbia from any form of grant assistance to students in financial aid to a straight loan program.
I'd forgotten that.
Yes, so that it would cause a great deal of concern.
You're saying that the federals give loans?
Yes, there is a mixture of, in most provinces, of grant and loan. And the province picks up in, I guess, all provinces except Alberta and British Columbia, a portion of that as a grant, which is forgiven at the end of...
We've just wiped out the grant system in British Columbia about a year ago. All right, now.
This is the start of it this year.
One other broad question, then I will go...
Well, just finish this tuition question that you raise. I mean, the question of what should be paid. has to do with who benefits. And if you look at education, typically there are two beneficiaries. One is the individual, so there is some private benefit that comes from education, and supposedly there are social benefits. And the only argument for putting public money in it has to do with the social benefits that we think we get out of having an educated body politic. There is no broad answer that one can come to as to what level you ought to hit that at. You could have the experience of the UK, Australia, where students pay nothing. You can go all the way to Harvard, Princeton, whatever, where they're paying $10,000, $12,000 a year for 3/4 of tuition. I think that the important issue has to do with ensuring that whatever you do not deny access for anyone who could benefit from the education, who can't benefit because of financial reasons. So I don't get that worried about what level you peg that at, but if you're going to increase it dramatically, you have to have a financial aid program that ensures that good students who don't have the means can get to university.
You also have to have a better local economy so that students have the opportunity to get employed in the office.
That's one of the big discouragements. If a
Yes.
guy can't get a job to get on his feet and his parents can't help him, he's got to go grubbing for work.
Or even a woman, Jack.
Well, guys nowadays, according to today's standard, can be
Well.
men and or woman and or it. So
As
let's
you
make
see
it a generic term.
Well, I think you have to be very careful that you start depreciating the value of a university education. It certainly, it can be argued, you know, we hear the famous stories of the guy who's got a PhD driving a cab. But in fact, all of the data bear out that the employment levels are very much higher for those who have a university degree, the likelihood of getting a job that you'd like to have, your income, all of those are positively correlated with university
And of course,
education.
you chicken out on accessibility if I question you in detail. You say accessibility must not be restricted financially, it must be on the basis
That's
of...
not chickening out. I agree entirely with what George said. He's right. You don't want to have a system that keeps bright, poor people out. That's a crime.
See, there is an argument, an economist would make an argument that says if you have very low tuition levels, people like myself and others who have adequate income to educate their children are getting a public subvention.
Agreed entirely. It's a very delicate balance, that's the problem.
It's a toughie.
Do you accept the nomenclature? I don't know whether I've learned that word.
That's very
Beautiful.
impressive.
It's beautiful.
The
You
nomenclature.
didn't be able to do that before you got that honorary degree.
That you are a second-class university and you are second and a half class?
I think just the way you handle that proves as a graduate at SFU that we're still first class.
Bless your side.
No, I'll respond to that. I will accept the argument that says that we do not have in Canada an internationally recognized university. We have departments within some of our universities that are clearly at that class level. But I'm personally dubious that you can run first-class, outstanding academic institutions that are totally publicly funded. I think that's a very difficult kind of thing to do. If you look at the major international universities, they are in many instances either privately funded now or have been over the past. And I think one of the real regrets is that we do not have any private university system in Canada.
University of Toronto was a national school. It was a school of international distinction, and several of the other things that you've not brought up that are in Jack's book, and I agree with, the move toward a smorgasbord education, a cafeteria-style education, a whole number of other things that he raises has, along with financing, created the deterioration.
And of course, with the economic climate now, anybody who can afford to hide in a university until they get a job will do so.
Sure, and lots of them are. Sure.
And that's when you can't apply high intellectual standards to put people in university.
Perhaps, yes.
How about losing your best people? We're at second.
We've had some modest losses, and they're typically in those areas where people have a lot of options. Business commerce is one area where there are people who have moved. We've lost 5 or 6 people from our Faculty of Commerce, which happens to be a very good one on the Canadian scene. We have some rumblings that in other places we may well lose some people, and clearly this coming year we have to find some means of ensuring that we provide some salary increases to our deserving people.
I have a call from Nelson, which was one of the places where we had a university, was it?
David Thompson
David
Center.
Thompson, and that's now
It was a joint UVic, Selkirk College.
Go ahead from Nelson now. Speak up, please. I want to see if the phones are working.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
I'd like to say, as you know, that DTEC was closed down this year, which makes it necessary for students who wish to continue on their education, they have to go to Vancouver in order to get their degree granting, education. Which the cost, when you're speaking $2 per student, you're not including the cost of traveling,
2,000.
accommodations. In raising those rates, I mean, that really limits the students that can go.
This is not a parochial point, but a very British Columbia point and Canadian point. How do you equalize education when we're so tight for money, fees are going up, provincial government's clamping down, the federals may clamp down too, only the people in the big centres have easy access?
Yeah, no, I think one of the unfortunate situations in British Columbia is you have all three of the universities that are publicly funded within 50 miles of one another. It creates some difficulty, although you have to recognize that to move one of them to Kelowna or Prince George or wherever really just helps the situation for that particular local community. People still have to move into those areas, and there's no question that if you live in an area other than where the university is located, you have a very dramatic increase in your cost.
But we're in an economic situation now, Dr. Granatstein, where the universities are bound to be starved of what they want, are they not?
Sure. And everybody knows it. The point is that in Ontario, at least, and in BC to some extent, we've been starved for several years in the past. Even when times weren't bad,
That's
we were
not
being
what
cut off.
say.
Yes, it is.
You'd say there was a hell of a lot of money wasted.
Sure, there was a lot of money wasted, but the cuts in Ontario, at least, started in the mid-70s. That system in Ontario, which is much bigger, has been really hammered for almost 10 years now.
Both university systems are roughly at the same point. They were just handled in different ways. They've sort of squeezed the edge off for years and years in Ontario. We got hit for 2 or 3 years.
Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Webster. Dr. Pedersen, I have 3 questions that I would like to ask you, and then I'll hang up and listen to your response. The first is, first of all, I'm a third-year university student at UBC, and in the registration guide and course schedule, there are innumerable pages where their courses are not offered in 84, 85. I'd like to know how many courses, and in view of that, how can you justify a man that has just been hired by the university recently for a newly created position of vice president at over $60,000 a year? And my next question, geez, I've lost my train
Take your
of thought.
time, take your time. Your first one is you're a third-year student, and you're worried about all the courses not being offered for 84, 85.
They've wiped out some graduate programs completely.
And then you're annoyed at the 60, you want a justification of the 60,000 a year vice president. And your third question?
I forgot what it was.
Hold on anyway, might come back to you. Dr. Pedersen.
I can't answer the first question. I don't have any idea how many courses are not being offered in 84-5, but it's a very common practice to offer courses on an alternate year basis. So I don't know that there is any major shift there in practice. It might well be that a number of departments who've been cut back have found it necessary to increase the number that are not offered. But in any case, if it presents a practical problem, I guess my advice would be to go see that particular department and see if your program can go ahead.
Next question.
In the case of the Vice President in Development, I'm really quite pleased you asked that question, because this gentleman has been brought in to do what we think is a very important job, namely to ensure that the university starts to rely on other sources of income other than being totally dependent on the provincial government and tuition fees. So
You mean to look for
euphemism, you know, development, the word development is a euphemism for someone who goes out and helps us raise money in the private sector and with our alumni and so on. So I can say without even any qualification, in the 3 weeks he's been on the job, he's already made much more than his salary.
No, on a commission basis, he might...
No, he's not on a commission.
I said on a commission basis, he might do 3 times
Yes,
as well.
he might do very well.
Thank you, ma'am. Do you remember the third question? No.
She's
Do you
gone.
remember the third question? She's gone. After the break. Well, you mentioned Canadian studies being a waste of time and money.
Yes.
Gentlemen, Dr. Saywell.
At the University of Toronto a few years ago, I was asked to head up a task force on Canadian studies after all of the ballyhoo nationally about it. And I had a blue ribbon committee of people like Claude Bissell and so on that, and we came to the conclusion that Jack comes to in the book, that in the case of Canadian studies, first-rate universities have Canadian studies across the map. They have good Canadian historians like him and good political scientists and so on, and you don't have to bring that together in the form of an umbrella organization.
No, we don't have a formal program.
You didn't
No.
fall for this
No.
baloney.
No.
Good. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, hello, Jack.
Yeah.
I tend to agree with your guest there on the issue of tenure, and I'll explain why. I've been attending university for the past 6 years, and 4 of those years I've spent at SFU. And just based on my own experience as a student, I found that some of the tenured professors were much less interested in taking time with the students. I found that very often the case was that they take up the same notes, you know, semester after semester and read them through. And I was very disappointed recently to learn that 2 of the brightest young professors that they had in the particular department that I was in have been canned, and these other guys are still there. And it seems to me that you know, it's just a sort of a abhorrent situation.
Good. I'll take that as your comment. I want to try my phones and see if I can get some more good calls. A short response to that. Have you had to fire brighter people and keep tenured people?
We have tightened up the tenure process. I don't know the people he's speaking of who left may have been people who were casualties of the tenure process. A lot of people now come up for tenure and do not get it. This year, about 1/3 of the people at SFU who were up for tenure did not get it.
Is that because of a policy decision, or they didn't deserve it?
That is because we have improved standards, and what I'm saying is that tenure is not a blanket approval for people across the map. You have to make high standards to get it.
It was at one time, wasn't it?
Yes, I think it was. No, I think that's a fair comment.
And you got it on the automatic basis?
No, I got it because I earned it.
For all I know, you got it because you've been there long enough.
No, I got it because I'd written a lot of good books, and that's the basis on which people should get it.
Oh, you mean publish or perish?
Yeah, exactly. We call for that. Students make the mistake of assuming that because someone is a good teacher, he necessarily deserves tenure. And we argue in this book, I'm glad that your caller agreed with our position on tenure, but we argue in this book that students generally can't tell whether someone is a good scholar or not. And sometimes good teaching is showmanship, and sometimes showmanship doesn't have any scholarship behind it.
Look at me, I'm a good teacher, and I'm practically functionally illiterate.
You said it.
No, but it's a fact. I'm a good teacher, but as a scholar, I'm a disaster.
Well, but the point is that in the
Have
university,
you ever tried it?
your teachers are supposed to be scholars.
It's a good point to make, though.
Well, it's an important point to underline because one of several distinctions between universities and any other area of education is that while in other areas of education there may be researchers and people who are very good at it, the university, the complete integration between teaching and research is fundamental, so I accept that point.
Go ahead, please.
I have a question which has been bugging me for a long time. It's, are the universities doing anything about limiting the classes to the amount of graduates that can be absorbed by the industry or profession or whatever?
Excellent question, sir. I remember one year when in British Columbia we only gave 1 full forestry degree a number of years ago. Now, are you trimming your classes according to the job demands?
I think we are to some extent, but I really have a lot of problems with the notion that somehow the universities ought to become manpower planners. I do not know of a single nation or political constituency in the world that's had success, and that includes Iron Curtain countries.
Japan?
No, they simply do not. It does not work. And I guess my response to that is to say, look, we will make the service available as we've got resources for it. We'll provide as much information as we can to our students, and it's up to the consumer to decide what he or she wants to buy.
Well, but let's be specific right now. I forget the precise figures, but there was an attempt, I think, to produce the number of graduating doctors from 80 to 130.
We are now at 130 at the
It
University.
was to be 160, and you brought it back to 130.
Well, we never had resources to go to 160.
Yeah. Now, doctors are in very much oversupply at the moment, and the government's saying, we're not going to give you numbers. You won't get on the British Medical Services Plan.
Right.
So therefore, in that case, if there's an oversupply, you might trim your output of doctors next year to 50.
We might. On the other hand, the question and the argument, I guess, that would be raised by our minister, who is obviously a member of our Faculty of Medicine as well, has to do with the question of opportunity for young people in British Columbia to join that particular profession. The University of British Columbia's medical school only produces about 40% of those who get licensed in British Columbia in any given year. So it isn't as if we are producing an oversupply per se in terms of perceived need. We have a huge in-migration of people from Scotland and England and other parts of Canada.
Before I
who
come
want
to
come.
teaching, what about the oversupply of I'm going to have BCTF on shortly, and I know I'm going to get horror tales about unemployment.
Well, George, who used to be a dean of the Faculty of Education and is in that field, knows more about it than I think that we are coming very close to the period of time, a couple of years, 3, 4 years away, when we're going to have an undersupply, and we cannot cut back there as drastically as the public image seems to think we can.
All 3 faculties of education are well cut back at the present time in British Columbia.
There's a tendency, Jack, that, and I think it's spread in this province by the Fraser Institute, to assume that you can turn off the tap in various faculties. I mean, if you need people in business and commerce, you suddenly can tenure in the philosophy department and put more people teaching commerce. It doesn't work that way. And besides, it seems to me that the kind of system that we're calling for in this book is one that would require people in hot faculties, commerce, to have some history, to have some English, to have some ethics, and to give them a kind of education that they might, in fact, be able to use in a sane way when they go out into the business world.
Yeah, we'd have to be really bankrupt and strapped and broken to wipe out all kind of academic education and really train for trades.
But some people want that.
Some people want that.
Social credit wants it.
In the United States, for instance, about 65 to 70% of the people who graduate just in the humanities end up in the private sector. Those figures are almost reversed in this country.
Yeah, I suppose it's education that matters, not the
That's
degree.
right.
Go ahead, please. Can't hear you. Can't hear you.
Am I on?
Yes, you are.
Mr. Webster, you made a comment earlier about perhaps there were too many people being educated too far.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to follow up on that by saying, first, I have a degree at the master's level, and I'm amazed that when I went to university that we did not train people in some of the basic human qualities, such as you demonstrate so well, those of courage and honesty.
Is this your brother on the line, Jack?
And my question to Mr. Pedersen is, can we continue to turn out people who are very highly trained in physics and medicine and have them be perhaps less than fully human? We do offer this kind of education in private institutions.
Yeah, I share some of the concern that I think is implicit in your question. I am much in favor, I guess, of generalist education, certainly at the undergraduate level. I think that the strongest kind of education an individual can have typically is good basic liberal arts, good basic sciences, and then worry about the specialization later on. I personally am somewhat concerned that I see people heading off into professional school straight out of high school and have limited backgrounds in the first 2 years at least in the humanities.
Gentlemen, you're getting, thank you very much, getting a little too esoteric for me. You're on a campaign on your own behalf?
Sure.
This is your publisher parish for you and Bothwell and Granatstein for a year?
No, this is more likely to kill us. We have our other scholarship as our publisher
And
parish.
are you telling me you're selling this pamphlet for how much?
A mere $12.95.
To help the NDP?
No, to help pay our libel bills, probably.
No, you're pretty safe. You're very short on names in the book. That's the easy way. Are you in a, one word, are you in a crisis now, or will you cope satisfactorily at SFU?
It depends entirely upon what the financial situation is that's to face us this year.
So you're hanging to wait and see what Mulroney and his new education minister, who might, oh, he doesn't have an education minister.
No, the dependency here is totally on the provincial government. It does not matter in the short run, anyway, what the federal government decides to do. That will not affect us.
Who is the Minister of Education? Do we have one? What's his name?
Minister of Education is Heinrich, Jack Heinrich.
Oh, yeah, I thought he was still
And university is McGeer.
Oh, McGeer, of course. How's his tennis these days?
I don't know.
Look, I'm grateful for you coming along this morning.
Our
and
pleasure.
I'm sure that the viewers, avid on the subject of cultural achievement, have got a nice balanced view of your pamphlet and your very responsible and difficult jobs.
Hey, I'm going back and promote Jack for the executive officer position in our faculty association.
In the union?
The position is open, right?
That's because he's given up his real union fervor.
The weather's much better.
Before you go,
Yeah, that's
gentlemen, I'm going to do something which is for my own benefit. I'm going to go down the line and talk to people very briefly to apologize. Can you hear me?
Good morning.
I'm sorry I didn't get you on, ma'am. Thank you very much for calling. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Jack.
Thanks. I'm sorry I didn't get you on. Thanks very much for calling. Did you hear me? Hello there. Are you there? No, nobody there, so that line's okay. Did you hear me?
Yes, I did.
Thank you. I'm sorry I couldn't get you on. Do you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Hello, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'm sorry I didn't get you on. Did you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I'm sorry I didn't get you on. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I'm sorry I didn't get you on. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I'm sorry I didn't get you on. Jeanette, will you apologize to the others, and thank you, gentlemen. Next, we're turning to Pat Clarke, the BC Teachers Federation, and a specific problem, not just the province, but a specific problem in West Vancouver, after the break. Fine. It's Education Day today because it's kind of lagging along with Webster after my summer off. And one thing I've got to keep in touch with is the position and the situation about teachers in British Columbia. Pat Clarke is president of the BC Teachers Federation. You've had the job how long now, Pat?
Since July 1st.
Since July 1st. And Maureen Ciarniello is president of the West Van Teachers Association. Now, before we turn to the West Van situation, I remember last year's school began in a miasma of confusion, terror, and anger. You had a 3-day strike, and we're now into the second year of a third-year freeze on education spending. Is that correct?
Yes.
What's the score as far as teachers? How many have been fired? How many are out of work? And how do you feel about the system?
There haven't been any actually fired, Jack. They've been, we've had contracts terminated, which is different from firing as far as we're concerned. There are about 3,000 fewer now than there were in 1982, and this time 1982. We think there are about between 6,000 and 7,000 unemployed teachers in British Columbia. That's a hard number to nail down because there are people that tend to move in and out of that. We're looking at significantly larger class sizes. I've had reports from Vancouver of class sizes that are well over 35, some classes of 40.
That's in the class?
In the class.
That's not the much vaunted pupil-teacher ratio, which includes other people as well?
That's right.
All right, you're telling me you're down 3,000 teachers from 1982.
Right.
Potentially 6,000 to 7,000 out of work in British Columbia.
At the moment, yes.
At the moment. Nobody actually fired.
Not fired for incompetence or that kind of thing. What we mean by people out of work is simply people that no jobs for, that's all.
Well, they had jobs and lost them.
They lost them.
They had jobs and they lost them. So, you're in a bad way then.
Well, yes, and I was going to say that we think we're probably another 2,000 to go.
By the end of?
By the end of the program, by the end of 1980, the 86 school year.
All right, now, okay, that's one thing. So, you've faced and you've accepted this somewhat sad fact of economic life.
Well, no, we haven't accepted it. What we're in a phase now is attempting to bring the public's attention to, because the school system really is being devastated. There's just no question about it. If I was a parent, I would be, frankly, I'd be up in arms about it. And what we're concerned is that parents haven't been as informed about the situation. This year, we're expecting to see some interesting response from parents when they see what the situation is going to be in classrooms.
You're talking about teachers' aides all cut?
Yes, that's one of the things that's happened.
Is that in Vancouver alone?
No, that's in several school districts. Vancouver is the main one. I believe in Vancouver all aides were cut.
All right, as I come up to Maureen Ciarniello now, let me set the stage by saying, did you negotiate exemptions in almost every school board from Bill 3, was it? Bill 2 or 3?
Yes, Bill 3. All but 9 so far. The West Van is the particular problem. The board is intransigent.
Maureen Ciarniello, president of the West Van Teachers Association. Can you tell me what the trouble is in West Van and what your dispute is? Because I understand that your school board has now been blacklisted by BCTF.
Well, Jack, what's happened is in West Van we have a unique situation where our board refused to ratify a Bill 3 exemption clause that we had an agreement on in committee through the use of an outside mediator. And this had happened after months of negotiations where they had refused the services of a CSP mediator. And so we had to go to an outside mediator, spend our money, spend the taxpayers' money, spend the board's money. And when we got the agreement in committee, our membership ratified it. The board then presented us with a new agreement, which was unacceptable. It wasn't the agreement we had ratified in committee.
You feel you've been double-crossed by the school board and the ratification, kind of double-crossed, my exaggeration, on the ratification of a Bill 3 agreement, which would have meant firing on what basis, or laying off on a seniority basis?
Yes. It was a process for dismissal, and at the end of this year, we lost about 24 full-time equivalents that were temporary teachers, and these teachers would have had some process for re-engagement if we had had our Bill 3 exemption clause. We felt they'd been very mistreated.
Well, now these teachers, the 24 full-time equivalents, does that mean full-time teachers?
Yeah, that's more than 24
doesn't mean
bodies.
people.
It's about 30 bodies.
It's an equivalent of 24 full-time teachers.
Mhm.
They were all laid off.
Mhm.
You want them to be first for the rehiring in West Vancouver for the jobs.
Yes, because some of them have been in our district for 6 or 7 years, and we feel that's a misuse of
Well,
a
what-
temporary contract.
Yeah, of course. What is West Vancouver School Board doing then? Have any people been rehired?
A few have been rehired. Out of about 45 people that actually went, it looks like a little around 19 or 20 people are back. But I'm not clear on the numbers. We haven't.
No, but the point being that if you'd got the Bill 3 exemption, they would have had to hire these people back more or less in the order when needed in which they were laid off.
Exactly.
And now they don't have to.
No.
Now they can bring in anybody from anywhere for the job.
Yet, well, they can't because we're in dispute.
I know, but technically
Technically,
speaking.
they could, yes.
And what have you done to West Van School Board's hiring right now? You've put them on a blacklist.
That's right. It's called in dispute.
It's in dispute. What does that mean?
That means that any job which becomes available in the West Vancouver School District should not be applied for by a member of the BC Teachers Federation.
So you've put up a barrier and said no BCTF member, qualified teacher, should apply for a job in West Vancouver.
That's right.
Which will create vacancies in your classrooms for teachers.
We have a couple of situations right now that the only people they can hire is anyone who was under the employment of the school board when we went into dispute. And they have a couple of positions they can't fill with temporary teachers who were let go, and they can't hire from without because of the dispute.
Because you won't let them.
Exactly.
Now, if a BC Teacher Federation crossed this invisible picket line, he would lose his certificate, wouldn't he? He could
Possibly,
lose.
possibly, yes. That would be the ultimate outcome of the process that we have.
Is there anything in your Bill 3 exemptions or whatnot? No, the government never did remove the requirement that a teacher to practice in BC must be a member of BCTF.
No, in order to teach in a public school in BC, you must be
You must be a member of BCTF. No movement from the school board?
Very little. We're in about the same position we were at the end of the year. They
Who
still-
runs it now? Who's the chairman?
Chairman is Don Sakula.
Don Sakura, I don't know. All the old timers are off the
It's a
board.
girl.
Oh, it's a girl. D-A-W-N.
Yes.
It's difficult
And-
to keep things right.
But we feel that that we were not bargaining in good faith this year.
They let
That
you down.
There was no
They
intention.
came to the brink, you got an agreement, an arbitration, you ratified it, and they said, no, we've changed our minds.
Mhm.
That's what's said.
Exactly.
And are the children suffering in West Vancouver because of this?
Well, I haven't got a lot of figures, but we have heard that some class sizes are up to 43 in a science class at the high school level. And of course, in science, with the equipment and everything, you can't stuff that many kids in a room.
And you, of course, are still working in the school system yourself.
No, I'm not. I'm a temporary teacher.
You're one of those laid off.
Yes, I would have been laid off had I not been president. So this is a full-time job for me.
Oh, I see. Being
But
a
I'm-
president is a full-time job.
But I'm hired by the Teachers Association.
To be the full-time president of the West Van Teachers Association. I'm going to take some calls on this West Van and the teaching situation. I wonder if we'll go back to the old horror stories of 15, 20 years ago about the schools. I don't know. After the break. My child is being held back because 49% of the kids in the class can't speak English, and my kid's not getting the proper attention.
No.
That happens in West Van, I know.
Yeah, then we need pressure on people to make sure, on the government, to make sure that money is being put into the aids and the support services that can help those students.
Either that or you
in the
restrict
class.
the number of people who can't speak English who've sometimes flooded the country.
Well, I
But
think
one's not allowed to say that either. Is one.
I don't think that's an appropriate argument. The argument is that the services have to be there.
I'm giving the ordinary argument of the ordinary person that says, name of God, nobody speaks English in my kid's class at school.
Yes.
And my kid's being neglected. I mean, we all pay lip service to all the niceties, but that's what ordinary people say. And they're not necessarily in any way, shape or form racist. They're just mad that their kids aren't getting paid attention to. Where am I? I'm going to go right up the line, see if the phones work. Go ahead, please.
Jack, I want to just correct an impression that was left with
Carry on.
you over the in dispute business in West Vancouver.
Right.
the president of the BCTF implies that they have control over certification. That's vested with the Lieutenant Governor and Council through the Ministry of Education. They cannot remove a teacher's certificate without that approval. And the cause that West Vancouver is in now in dispute, that would certainly not be justification to remove a teacher's certificate. They would never get that past the Lieutenant Governor and Council. That's just nonsense what Clarke is trying to tell you.
Well, maybe I put it in too positive a manner. Pat, do you agree with what he says?
He's right, and ultimately the Lieutenant Governor and Council determines certification.
But you're using your unionized clout to say to teachers, don't go or you'll be in trouble with us.
That's right, that we can go through a process internally where we will remove membership. And in effect, the certificate to teach, in other words, the ability to teach in a public school. He's right technically that the certificate is lifted or not lifted by the Lieutenant Governor.
But you can get it as far as the Lieutenant Governor and make a decision in the Cabinet.
That's right.
Thanks for clarifying that, sir. I was not aware of that aspect. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Webster, good morning. These questions were actually meant for your last panel, but would you mind if I asked you them? Hello?
Yes, please, briefly, if you don't mind.
As you know, many of our Canadian students can't afford to go to university, and many of them that can't afford can't get grants to go.
Mm-hmm.
Now, yet I am quite aware of the fact that millions of Canadian taxpayers' dollars are being given away in the form of purported aid to developing countries.
Ma'am, I get your point. I don't want to break up my teaching, my interview just now. I'll deal with it another morning. Go ahead, please.
Morning.
Morning, that's you.
Yeah. First of all, I've been living in North Vancouver, not West Van, but I've been following this very closely, and it seems to me that the teachers really got double-crossed. They had an agreement, everybody agreed to it, and West Van didn't want to get stuck with the exemption from Bill 3, and they pulled the rug out from under them at the last second. The other thing I want to ask the teachers is how they hope to settle this now, now that
they're in dispute.
It's been so intransigent.
Okay, how are you going to settle this with the school board being so intransigent?
Well, we have had a meeting and discussed some strategies, but I really can't say them at the moment because they haven't gone before the general membership.
Oh, are you maybe going to pick at the schools?
Oh, I hope not.
Oh.
No, I don't think that's on our list.
Okay, thank you. Are you a teacher, by the way?
No, I'm just an unemployed worker from Burrard Yarrows.
Unemployed in this great country with a brand new Conservative government which has promised you the...
some warships down there. I'm out to lunch.
Well, what we need are more warships in Burrard, and I'm not joking.
Well, all we got was the crumbs off the table. The Easterners got all the contracts, almost $3 billion worth.
And we got $1 billion.
100 million, huh?
We only got 100 million?
No, I think it was 80 million being spent in BC, and in Ontario and Quebec they're getting, I don't know, 2.5 billion.
Go ahead, please.
Is that me?
That's you, ma'am.
Oh, I was just wondering, I'm listening to these teacher representatives here, and when I went to school here in Vancouver, there was, I went to one of the second largest schools in British Columbia, and we had 38 in our grade 12 graduating classes, and there was...
Please don't give me history, sir. Times have changed. There were 55 in my class in school, and the bright kids sat in the front, and the not so bright in the second row, and the dumb kids, no, it was the other way around. The dumb kids sat in the front, and the brightest ones at the back. We were treated like cattle, and it was survival of the fittest. If you were bright, you were made it, and if you didn't, you became a laborer in the shipyards if you could get a job. Even I won't go back to that. Prince Rupert.
Yes, hello.
Yes.
My question is to the gentleman from BCTF. I understand that some of the class sizes in the Vancouver area are approaching 35 to 40, and their dispute with the people from the West End, and some of their science classes are approaching 43, yet they won't allow them to hire this extra 2 people. Why?
Well, to begin with, they're not hiring for jobs that are to do with those areas. And there's not the money in the budget to hire people.
Yeah, you shouldn't confuse the issue in West Vancouver, which is an issue which is going to bring some stability to that school district, with the fact that we're also criticizing provincial government for the way that it's funding education.
Are you going to put your full clout behind West Van and force the school board to its knees?
We will support the West Van teachers in any way that they ask us to.
I'm going to leave it at that this morning, and I'm very grateful for you, Maureen Ciarniello, coming here as President of West Van Teachers Association. And Pat, you and I will be in touch, I'm quite sure, over the season on crises as they develop. Thank you very much. I'll be back with a free-for-all, my first one since I came back after the break. Before I go to a free-for-all, I want to give you a little clip from the General Haig's speech to the Young Socreds last night. Reagan is God. Thank God for Reagan. Peacenik though I am on occasions, these people sometimes frighten me half to death, I'll tell you. So here's Big Al at the Socreds last night.
That we Americans are not going to achieve reductions in nuclear arms or lessening of nuclear terror if we unilaterally restrain ourselves and permit the Soviet Union to build in an unbridled way as they've done over the last 20 years. It's vitally important the Soviet leaders understand that should they fail to sit down and negotiate with us fairly, that we Americans have enough courage and enough will to do what we must to match them system by system. There is no other solution to the danger which we commonly face. Now, you know, I've dealt with Soviet leaders for the last 20 years, and they all have said to me, we don't care what you penurious Western imperialists say. We care about what you do and what you are willing to sacrifice for. And when you are willing to put your money where your mouth is, then we take you seriously. And what they don't like is the fact that Mr. Reagan has reversed 20 years of neglect to America's defense needs, and has once again, thank God, started to build America's strategic, regional, and conventional military power. Clearly, we cannot expect a risk-taking Soviet foreign policy. And anything in the arms control or in the dialogue with the West involves risks for the Soviet Union, and they're simply not ready for them. And it's not right to blame an American president who has at long last dealt with our defense needs and Soviet lawlessness by accusing him of being the contributor to this bad climate.
I don't care which side you're on or which country you live in, but isn't it absolutely bleeding terrifying? This is what Kissinger said in a much milder way when he was here with the approbation of Mike Harcourt, the mayor of Vancouver. It's the politics of power, and there's just no bones about it. What you have, we will have a better one, and we'll take you right to the brink, and if necessary, we shall annihilate humanity. But being a peacenik by itself ain't going to get us out of the mess. I don't know. Well, I'm back. I came back a week early, as you know, to cover the election campaign. I've taken a considerable amount of abuse from some semi-literate newspaper types on my stand on Mulroney and the interview. Taken a lot of praise from good friends on the subject, too. Haven't had a chance to bash at social credit. Want to point out to Bill Reid, the Surrey MLA, that the Sun asked him last night to tender his resignation as chairman of the Metro Transit Operating Company, and he might also wish to think of giving up his seat in the legislature. He was convicted, as you know, over a used car deal, and he hasn't appealed. And Reid testifying, the judge who tried the case said he found most of the evidence for Mr. Reid to testify in his own case to be astonishing and incredible. That's far too high a standard for British Columbia to insist upon. Far too high a standard, certainly, for social credit to insist upon, but I'm glad to see the Sun making the point, because it's a standard we should insist upon. And while I'm on the subject of a little social credit rant, if it weren't so disastrous, it'd be funny. Our good friend Walter Davidson, you know, the man with the power in Victoria, that magnificent politician of social credit, The guy who barred the lobbies, don't always remember these things, barred the lobbies, the television cameras, is going to outfit our sergeant at arms and his staff in military type uniforms, black uniforms, peak caps, decorated with gold braid. Women must wear breeks, that's trousers. It's beyond belief. Time of restraint. And talking of time of restraint, I had the Attorney General here yesterday, and he gave me assurances for which I will require confirmation, not that I would disbelieve him, that this new restaurant for the lawyers in the courthouse is going to be paid for by the lawyers in and the public. We need another restaurant in the top of the courthouse in the unused space in that badly planned building, like we need a hole in the head. And I am speaking on behalf of the other restaurants in that area as well as myself. Go away for a couple of months and all kinds of things go on that should have been drawn to your attention. I hope I can keep up this level of energy. We should have a good year. After the break. We got about 5 or 6 minutes. If you could keep your own particular comment or question short and sharp so I can run up the lines and talk to everybody waiting, I'd be very grateful. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I would like to address the topic of the quality of the Canadian university system.
We just did it this morning. We were told it was second class, and even, what's his name, Pedersen admits that we do not have a first class, privately funded university in this country, which we should have. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
I would like to suggest that you're just as bad as the rest of the media. You all missed the most important story of the election, and that is the one that Andre Ouellette mentioned last night, eventually.
What was that?
That all those silly appointments are totally illegal because John Turner never was Prime Minister and can't be Prime Minister because he was picked by a few party hacks in the Liberal Association and not by the people, and therefore if he signed anything he was only a citizen passing by. And
well, ma'am, if I can stop you for a moment, I raised that very point in public coast to coast, that it was ridiculous that they could go out into the streets and pick up anybody they wanted. He would not have signed the documents himself. There would have been an acting Prime Minister. Much more significant is a story in yesterday's Globe and Mail from Jeffrey Simpson, in which he indicates that some of the names on the list were put there by Turner. Now, think on that one if you can get it through your thick head. Go ahead, please. Hello.
Hello.
Now, did you hear me when I came up and said hello all right?
Yep.
Because I hadn't warned you who was next. I'm just testing the phone to see if I can operate on the basis of you understanding that I want to talk to you.
Yeah,
go ahead, please.
I understood, yeah.
Right, go ahead.
I just wanted to give a comment on Mulrooney, and I'll leave it at that.
What's the comment?
I think Mulrooney is the tale of the jelly bean-eating mad dog of Hollywood.
Well, thank you very much. That's not bad. The tale of the jelly bean-eating mad dog of Hollywood. It's not very nice. Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just noticed that Mr. Gordon Pearson there on your program, and I wanted to ask him, I spent 2.5 years at BCIT studying in forestry resource program, and I want to go to UBC, and they'll only give me a year's credit.
Just a minute. I can barely hear you because there's a crack. Did you say you spent 2.5 years at BCIT studying upholstery?
Forestry, in the bush.
Oh, forestry. And now you can't get into UBC?
Well, I can get in, but they'll only give me a 1-year credit.
They won't give you a credit?
They'll only give me 1-year credit.
That's a good one. You better fight it out. I'll take it up in detail maybe one day. Go ahead, please. Yes.
I'm just wanting to make a comment about the university discussion.
Yes,
My
ma'am.
husband's a graduate student at SFU, and they're not eligible for financial aid in the graduate student, but he's doing research trying to get his physics degree, and I don't understand why the foreign students that come there to do their graduate work. They get special grants and special, financial aid, and they get through in there 3 or 4 years and they're out. And my husband's there for 4 or 5 years, trying to get his degree and working on TA ships, marking, 70 papers a week and trying to, get finished. All these foreign students, they'll come for their graduate degrees and they're out, I'm just making this comment, and I just don't...
That's a good comment, ma'am, and these things always seem to be unfair. Go on. Is this Frank Ney?
Yes, it is, Jack.
How are you, Frank, Mayor of Nanaimo?
Well, we're not that happy right now. We're very discouraging what's been happening over here during the last few days.
Now, it's been a very confusing story. We've done quite a bit of research. I know a little bit about it, but you want to make one point, that there's a new vote of the Iron Workers Local in Vancouver. When?
That's on Saturday.
That's 7:12. What time on Saturday?
Well, I don't know the time, but...
Are you paying the fares of people over?
The community, various car dealers and citizens are contributing to the fares because the unemployed people...
Frank, we'll have to leave it at that and encourage the members to go to the meeting. My time is up.
Full turnout. There's 9,000 people out of work in Nanaimo.
I understand that he's talking about I've got 30 seconds to go. He's talking about the possibility of several hundred jobs on this Meccano-like construction plant for Local 712.
100 jobs to start with, but it could go to 1,000 in the end.
Saturday, the meeting for the iron workers in Vancouver. Frank, I'll talk to you later, after the break. Back Monday with Webster at 9 a.m. precisely. I'm very happy indeed that your noises were out of joint in that the election was declared when it came to the Ontario border.
When Mulrooney turned down the opportunity to go on your show, the Tory campaign really gathered momentum in the East. we could feel the gust all the way from Newfoundland.
That's a typical self-serving Eastern remark.
Jack, does this mean that you're running for the vacant Senate seat in British Columbia?
I've turned down more Senate seats than you will get from Premier Brian Davis, one of our fears. Siegel's going to get a big job with Mulroney. Dalton's back in the back rooms again, writing his recycled newspaper columns. They've got about as much clout out here as an old toilet roll. Nice to talk to you again, Lloyd. I hope you get a clip out of this one for the next election coverage. The Great Brain Robbery on check at midnight. Something was slow. I waited a fraction, too. Canada's Great Brain Robbery on check at midnight. Everybody wants the best possible university education for their children, and everybody thinks that their children are genii. Well, I got a tip today from George Pedersen, president of UBC, no slouch, I'll tell you, as George, that the way to get the best education for your child or your youngster is to get them to a privately funded university. But there isn't one in Canada, because only privately funded universities can really pick the cream of the crop, train the cream of the crop without pressures from outside funding or picking anybody who must get to university. So there's no hope of your child getting a really first class. Too long. I got a good tip for you from George Pedersen, the president of UBC today. We were discussing allegations about the qualities of Canadian universities. George Pedersen told me that the best education is obtained only at privately funded universities. Where is there one in Canada? There isn't. We have good universities, but we don't have the best, because Canada lacks a privately funded university which is free from all political and financial pressures of federal